Okay, so hello, Dave. Welcome
Hi.
to Green Gorilla Conversations. So the series of videocast conversations with sustainability professionals that made it in the sustainability world. And I'm very happy to have you here today.
Thank you for asking me.
That's great. In fact, I got inspired by your talk at London Build in October, and I thought this is great. You know, we need to have him on board. So, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your background and how you arrived to this point?
Yeah, sure. I'm a sustainability consultant. Worked for 25 years, trying to get people to make their buildings more sustainable. Really, that's what I've been trying to do.
Fabulous. So your background is in.
So I started off doing building surveying degree, and then I did a master's in energy and the built environment at Cranfield University back in the days when there wasn't really anything called sustainability back then. It was more about energy, and then it turned into environmental stuff, and then it became sustainability. So I sort of moved through those stages and worked in a wide variety of places, from sort of building engineering companies, worked for facilities management company, Johnson Controls, for a while. And I've been just 15 years now at AECOM, running a team of people who are, as I say, trying to enhance the built environment and get people to do more.
Brilliant, fabulous. So, but one of the main reasons why I got inspired by your talk at London Build is that you wrote a great book on circular economy. So, do you want to talk about it a little bit to tell us, what's the main concept behind this book, and maybe your main inspiration to actually write a book?
Well, I mean, the inspiration was very much seeing the work that Ellen MacArthur Foundation were doing a couple of years ago, and still are, and reading Cradle to Cradle, which is a great book, I think. And I thought, crumbs, I'm sure we could take some of these ideas and apply them directly to buildings, and it hadn't really been done as a book and a sort of as an overall framework that I could find. There had been sort of our case studies, and there were people writing sort of papers and brochures and things, but I think there's something here, and I thought it was just a really interesting idea. And I brought together lots of the different ideas, from things like design for disassembly, design for adaptability, ideas that have been around for a long time but haven't really been brought together into a framework that could be used really to hopefully, as you said, hopefully to inspire people to think about how we could just get away from this idea of a linear economy where we're digging stuff out of the ground, we use it for a while, and then we just chuck it away. And actually, my concern has been that we've been kidding ourselves in the built environment, that actually we're doing quite well with waste and resources, but actually we really aren't. We're not really using when we're getting materials and things and asking for labeling of materials and things like that. It's not really going the whole hog. And I think when we're looking at the back end, when we're saying, oh yes, we've recycled 80-90% of our waste, actually it's been downcycled to a lower grade, lower quality product, and I think it gives and then the rest of it's being burnt, and this idea that, okay, we've diverted from landfill, brilliant, but actually that's just because of the landfill tax. It's not because we're better at what we're doing, and I think it's just turning that linear process into a more circular process where we keep resources in play and we keep the value of those materials for as long as we can. And my sort of overall concept is the idea that we could be turning buildings into materials banks, and actually that you could have a built environment where you could draw on those resources and reclaim, reuse. Maybe you have to, if you have to, recycle them for the long term, for future generations.
I think that's a cracking idea, and that's why I thought, the book, which in fact we haven't even said the title yet.
Okay, yeah, the book is called Building Revolutions, applying the circular economy to the built environment, and it's published brilliantly by RIBA Publications, who who were absolutely brilliant to work with and did a great job of doing some nice layouts and a really cool front cover and all
Yeah, it's really cool and full of case studies as well and nice pictures, which are very inspiring indeed. I'm going to put the title and the link in the notes. Okay, so I find the book really interesting because, as you said before, it encompasses under the same cover a number of concepts that have been around for a while, like cradle to cradle and others. But the brilliant thing of the book is you actually put them together for the built environment in a very easy to understand way, in a way. And but you have a sort of ingredient list for the perfect recipe. So there are a number of elements that make the concept. So first, maybe you can explain more about these ingredients.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the basic concept is that we're. I sort of set out a very simple diagram that tried to just summarize everything really. So the idea is that there's some nested circles, and the inner circle is the sort of priority to say we should be retaining our existing building stock rather than demolishing it all after 30 years and rebuilding it, which is what we're doing in lots of our cities at the moment. And then we should refit and refurbish those buildings before we start starting over and building new. And then there's another three outer circles that look at that the idea that we could be reclaiming the bits of the building, so the components of the building, and the remanufacturing things like building services, kit and stuff, which again, none of that happens really at the moment. And then lastly, we'd be looking at whether we can recycle rather than downcycle things as a last resort, or if it's a biological material like fabrics or wood, then that would go through the biological cycle and be composted and returned to the biosphere. So that's the sort of basic concept, and that's very much based on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation diagram, which some of you may have seen, which is hugely complicated with lots of
Yes.
lots of arrows and circles going everywhere, but I think is much more applicable to manufacturing and to organisations than it is to the built environment. And then what I did is set out some design principles, some of which we've already mentioned, but designing out waste, which is very much around the sort of RAP principles and things that we've seen before, design for adaptability, design for disassembly, using the principle of the layers of the building, which we can talk about in a minute perhaps, and then lastly actually selecting the right sort of materials that fit with the whole circular economy principles. And then there's a sort of overarching ideas around the outside of the diagram, which really pick up this idea that waste as a resource. So just getting rid of the idea that waste is just something we throw away. Yeah. There is no away, it's still here on the planet, and we're just wasting resources. So that sort of that fits with sort of industrial symbiosis and the ideas of what happens in nature really. The idea that in nature there is no waste. So basically, what comes out the back of a cow is we would think of as waste, but actually is a very useful nutrient for the pasture that they're growing on. So the waste from one system becomes a resource for another, and we're already doing some of that in the built environment. There's a lot more that we could be doing to take away the waste. And then lastly, the sort of really interesting concept I think is new business models. So how can we get away from this idea that we have to consume stuff, that we buy lights, we buy chillers, we buy boilers, we buy bits of kit for the building, when actually all we want is the light and the coolth. We don't necessarily want to own lots of light bulbs that we then have to upgrade, repair, whatever, and dispose of. And we end up, as consumers, we end up actually being responsible for that all the rest of that life of the product. And actually, if you could somehow, or if we could use some leasing arrangements to push that responsibility back onto the manufacturer, to say, actually, I don't really want to own that. I'm quite happy for you to be responsible for that and for the end of life of it. In which case, what it should do is create a much more circular loop where manufacturers would retain ownership of the resources that go to make that up, or if nothing else, they would know where to get those resources from and think more about how they could reclaim those back again at end of life. So that might be incentivized return or some other idea like that.
This is the concept that you have of performance versus products. So the performance of a building or an object or part of the building versus utilizing it as a product that you use and then throw away. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the likes of Interface have been pushing this idea for a little while now that you can get a carpet service, or I think they call it a flooring service or something. So basically, you can lease the carpet and then you give it back, or they take it back at end of life. And it's an interesting concept. It hasn't been highly taken up. But the same with Philips have created their pay per lux service, so you pay for a lighting service rather than for the lights, and that certainly has had some traction in the Netherlands with Schiphol Airport, and even in the UK there's one example I found, which was the NUS, National Union of Students headquarters building in near King's Cross there that is actually paid. Really interesting. They couldn't afford to get LED lighting, so they actually approached Philips with their pay-per-lux idea and said, look, we can't afford it, but we want the most efficient lighting. Can we lease some? If you pay the capital cost for LEDs, would you then? You know, we'd be happy to lease it, and we can actually pay over a long time, but we just can't afford the capital cost. And so they did. So Philips put in LED lighting, and they've got an energy efficiency agreement with them, which says, this is what, if the lighting uses more than this, we're going to pay you less rent for that month. So actually, they had Philips crawling all over the lighting system to make it better, and train them all on how to use it, and got all the lighting controls really refined, so that, you know, they all switch off when they're not in use. Which,
so both are actually paying really attention about the energy consumption of the building. They both have an invested interest in that. So that's quite, that sounds like a win-win, really.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I mean, it doesn't work in lots of situations, because in lots of cases, and I've tried to sell that concept into, you know, sort of, clients with a lot more money, and of course that doesn't work, particularly if they have their own on-site maintenance engineers and things like that. So if it's a small organisation, particularly if they don't have the capital, then I think that's a really interesting concept. But although, having just said that, it's interesting that Schiphol Airport have gone for it. I'm sure they're not you know, short of money, but I think they're in the Netherlands. They have a much more open door to the ideas of the circular economy.
Absolutely. In fact, that leads to the next question from me, which is implementation. So what do you think are the main barriers for these concepts that you just described, you know, to become, I wouldn't say mainstream, because that would be, you know, a long time before that happens, but to be picked up a bit more consistently by the market? What do you think the main problems are at the moment?
Well, I think the barriers are all fairly obvious, and I say that actually I could have written a book about the barriers. It would be quite long and very boring, and I think I'm not sure I want to go on about them too much, really. I think what I tried to write in the book was like, this is where we could be, this is the aspiration, this is, you know, what we could do, and trying to acknowledge some of the barriers as I went along. But I think, to pick up on your point about how do we influence it and what do we do next, I mean, I think there's a few really good things that there, and some insights that I've finally got to after sort of 2 years after writing the book. So firstly, in terms of the good news, I think, you know, particularly in London, for example, the draft London plan now has a couple of policies on the circular economy in buildings, which is just amazing. You know, that says that hopefully end of next year we'll actually have a policy drive there. In Scotland, they've got a big push for circular economy. In even in Wales, they have a I think it's called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and they talk about circular economy. So actually, it's getting picked up, and if we can get some of that policy drive, I think that would be fantastic. So that would helpfully remove some of the barriers, which is hard luck. You've got to do it. You know, I mean, you've got to write a circular economy statement in London end of next year for all major developments to go to the GLA. So, which is brilliant. And in terms of a career high for me, actually, they picked up my diagram that I used in my book as a summary, and they've used that in the London plan.
That's fabulous.
Which I was just really just delighted by. Whether it'll still be there in the final version, I don't know. They might cross it out, but
why not? I mean, as I said, I haven't seen so far a clear diagram. I've seen a lot of diagrams with lots of circles, you know, going. Yeah. With yours, it's really quite. It gets to the point, and I think you know, the fact also that, you know, the inner circles are the ones that really you should pay attention to start with. or the fact that, you know, the structure outside should be probably over-engineered to last longer, well then, you know, the other layers can be, you know, more disposable as such, but in an efficient way. I think you know, you hit the point there.
Sorry, you're picking up on. Sorry, I think the second thing I was going to say was on the implementation side. I think what's been great is having just started doing some work with a couple of clients. So we've been working with the Crown Estate, who have got a public declaration to implement circular economy in their portfolio, which is fantastic. And UCL Estates, University College London, have also got in their brief, you know, they want circular economy principles incorporated. So we've done a little bit of work with them, and actually it was very much on the practical level of, okay, what's out there now? What could we do on future projects where actually there is already a supply chain in place, and there's things that they could just basically swap out. So it's not at the not necessarily at the strategic level of we need to design our buildings to be more adaptable and fundamental principles there. It's more about component level selection and that sort of thing. Which is great, because actually we could then cost that as well. And I think that was my revelation after all these years, was actually realizing that the thing I've been avoiding, which is to talk too much about the costs and the life cycle impacts of these things. Because I've been working with our life cycle costing team in AECOM, who are really good and are really inspired actually and good at coming up with making that creative leap, which is usually a problem to say, well, we don't know enough about this to know exactly what the costs are, but can we infer and can we work out what it might be and meet in the middle? And it's been great because we actually provided some really simple graphs that showed them the life cycle costs, and some of the products actually, and some of the ideas were actually cheaper as well in capital cost terms. And once you start doing that, it was really showing the client, the design team, the cost consultants, the contractor. So everyone was then seeing that there weren't any barriers to doing this, and actually, in fact, it was actually some things were good to do, and we did do some things that worked out more expensive. So we said, okay, well, that's just good to know, and there might be a case for that in some situations, but there were a whole load of things that we said, well, actually, you know, this just makes sense.
Brilliant. In fact, my other question about that is, how do you think consultants can push these ideas towards their clients? So what's the best way? Because obviously we're talking about something that has been a bit cryptic until this point. Yes, the principle is quite clear, you don't waste anything, etc. But the application from manufacturing, which probably has been done to a certain level, to buildings which are complex machines, how do you justify that, you know, that, and how can we push as sustainability consultants these ideas to our clients who are often reluctant to embrace sustainability in the first place? And let's, you know, probably this is a bit, you know, a step further than that. So what is your suggestion?
Absolutely. Well, I think there's different levels to this. So I think for the clients that are leading the way in this, and there are some, I think it's, you know, you're pushing at an open door basically, and they're actually, what they're struggling with is actually understanding what circular economy is. Some people have made, you know, public or semi-public commitments to circular economy, but haven't maybe quite figured out exactly what they do. So that's where we can definitely help by explaining what the concept is, what the ideas and principles are behind it, and then seeing how we can help them to implement ideas around disassembly, adaptability, and all those things. But I think the clients that are going to be most open to this, and the ones I've been working with, are those that have a long-term interest in their properties. So working with universities, working with, you know, infrastructure bodies is much more likely to gain traction. I think if we're working with a speculative developer, it's much harder to build the case, just as it is.
That's what I was thinking.
With sustainability and all these other things. And I think
immediately.
Yeah, and I think that's where the case. Well, I think that's where you might maybe have to start more at product selection level rather than the overall sort of high level concepts, because they potentially cost money. But then if you look at someone like Derwent London, I mean, they've really taken that sort of adaptability concept and embraced it. So, you know, with their white collar factory development, they've said, okay, well, what they part of their research they did into white collar factory was looking at their existing portfolio and saying, how come all these these old warehouse buildings adapt so well to different uses. So they looked at what made them really good at adapting, and then they took those ideas and applied them to their building of white collar factory. So it's, generous floor to ceiling heights, good use of light, well positioned windows, cores, all the sorts of things you would expect to hear about an adaptable building. They've built into that, and I think that's, so people are taking on board some of this, I think. And if it's at the component level, then a good example that I did in the present, I talked about in the presentation, was raised floor tiles. So these 600 by 600 mil chunks of metal. They're steel, but they sandwich a particle board inside, and they're ubiquitous. They're used in all our office and other developments all the time, and thousands of thousands are being thrown away every day and probably sent to landfill or for recycling. And we found one company in the UK that actually then will come and get them free from site. We'll remanufacture them, so clean them all up. Basically, we'll warranty them, which is really important. That's one of the barriers, is if you're reclaiming stuff and all those things, is a warranty issue.
Yeah, of course.
And then selling them for 3/4 of the price of new ones. Really difficult to see why we're not all doing it. It's like, so and that's just one example of the way this could be going. That it doesn't have to be a massive sort of capital cost or change to the design. It could just be, let's use more reclaimed materials and components like that.
Right. So Dave, that's amazing, because I think the implementation element is probably what people would be interested in, and so all that you said so far is great, and it's also the concept of perhaps implementing what's possible at the moment, because it's all a new concept until this point in terms of practicalities, and perhaps some leaders will start and then others will follow through, and that's obviously how everything goes in the world. So that's fun. So one last point about how can we inspire other people, other sustainability consultants, and if you have any tips for doing their job better in a more enjoyable way, or something that you learned in the last 20 plus years of career.
Yeah, I think it's what's really been inspiring for me is just to take that step back from what you're doing in the day to day and actually challenge yourself with doing something else. And I think I started out, for me, it was writing articles about what I thought was a current issue or something that I wanted to inspire others to think about. Another thing I did, which I really enjoyed, was when I was in our Hatton Garden office, which is a multi-tenanted building. I got all the tenants together. It took me like a year, but I managed to get all the 6 or 7 tenants together, and then the landlord to work together to actually reduce energy use. And we saved, thousands of pounds for them. And actually, it was one of my few converts. I think I managed to convert the engineer, who was the resident engineer who was running the building, and he suddenly realised that actually not only could he save some money for his client, but actually he could help his career to be starting to think about more about the actually it was a landlord's agenda as well, and it just hadn't really sort of trickled down, and he suddenly went, oh, this is brilliant. And so we saved a whole load of carbon, so a lot of energy just by doing that. And I think that sort of thing where joining professional bodies and contributing there, and for me the book was just, for me, it was a real sort of taking a real flyer. It was a real gamble for me that I thought, well, am I going to, is anyone ever going to read this, or can I bear to think about anyone wanting to read it? But I spent 2 years of my life basically just writing the book in my spare time, and I got a little bit of and I got a good bit of money actually for or time from ACOM to help me be able to justify some of the time I was spending on that. And again, that required me to be pushing very hard internally to say, I think this is interesting, and this is what we need to do. And it was it's been a brilliant ride over the last couple of years, just to see how when you do something a bit different and try and push the agenda, actually it's amazing how many people pick it up and agree from the client side as well. So that's been great.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's been hugely inspiring. And if people, you know, I don't think you have to worry about people reading your book. It's really inspiring. It's great. And I think you got plenty of fantastic ideas that, you know, sustainability consultants that can push to their design teams, to their clients. And, you know, I have, you know, a lot of faith that it is going to happen big time. So, so thank you so much, Dave, for this, and yeah, good luck with the next book, perhaps.
Oh no, thank you, thank you very much for inviting me. Right, thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.